Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Eric Scopel on the show with me, Matt Prame. It's a Friday. It's a very cold Friday in Eugene, but recruiting is heating up for college programs across the country and especially for the University of Oregon. Saturday, the 25th of January, they are hosting their first junior day of the 2025 year. What is Junior Day if you're unfamiliar with that? It is an opportunity for Oregon to invite a whole bunch of prospects across the country from the Pacific Northwest, from the West Coast, to come basically pay your own way and get like the official visit type experience. There's certain things that they're not going to be allowed to do, like photo shoots are no longer allowed for unofficial visits, and that will change a little bit. But it's the prospects are paying their own way. They're coming to hang out for the day at Oregon. Sometimes it's 2 days, depending on how far guys are coming. They check out the campus. They meet with the football staff. They see some players. They meet with academic people. They get a real good scope of what Oregon football is all about. It's an opportunity to showcase things. And for a lot of these guys, Eric, this is the first opportunity for these players to be on campus, whether they're a current high school junior who next fall will be a senior, or maybe it's more likely a current high school sophomore who's going to be a junior, and there's some restrictions in how much contact you can have that's not in person, and that's why you do this. You come hang out in person and meet the staff and start to just develop that relationship, and this is the first one for Oregon, and it's a big one.
Yeah, and with kind of the accelerated timeline of kids making decisions, I mean, like most of these players will make a decision in the spring of their junior year now, or this is kind of the summer, and that's a shift. These types of visits are super imperative for making early impressions and for even getting guys to take those visits, a year or so from now. And then, of course, you want to build out these relationships with some of these 2027 kids because it's never too early to get going. And I think the list, which Matt and I are going to go over, and some of the names here, I mean, it suggests what we already know about where Oregon is at as a recruiting powerhouse. I mean, it's never been better. They're hosting a ton of players that are currently 5 stars or will be 5 stars when everything is all said and done. And I think that's the other part is like, it's not just you're bringing in a couple of regional kids, that they turned this into, we're bringing in our top targets and we're bringing in 5 stars from other parts of the country. So it's going to be a really fun weekend. And I think we're hoping we're able to cover it a little bit more aggressively in the past, but we'll see how that all comes together. But certainly something for Oregon fans to be following here. This is one of the bigger, I would guess, events post-season that's taken place so far.
You look at the group, there's about 4 or 5 guys that are currently committed to Oregon that's going to be here, and let's start there. The big one, Kendra Harrison, the number 1 ranked prospect at the tight end position for the 2026 class in the composite rankings. He's out of North Carolina. This is a big one. I think it was a little bit of a, oh, wow, they're really in that deep when he committed. And this is a 2-way athlete. He will play football at Oregon. He's 6'7". He's a massive target. He is also like a 4-star basketball prospect as well. He's very much a high caliber hooper. If that's the direction he wanted to go, he would have had all the blue bloods going after him there too. So that's a double dip. Oregon football will have the scholarship. He will probably be primarily a football player, but Dana Altman's probably going to get a really good, at very worst, practice player that will join the team at the second half of the season, and probably more than that. Trajarian Ball, a guy Eric and I saw, I think he was maybe one of your favorite players at Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
He committed this past Saturday Night Live in July at Oregon. He is the number 2 running back in the composite. He will be here as well. He's currently committed. Cody Green, a top 5 offensive tackle in the country from Mater Dei High School in Southern California, originally from the Seattle area, a guy that's looked up to Josh Connerly Jr. He will also be here. And then Bot Mulitalo, a 4-star defensive lineman, one of the best defensive line prospects, whether it's edge, nose tackle, D tackle. out west, he will also be in Eugene. And it would not surprise me in the slightest if a couple other guys from Oregon's commit list pop up and make it to Eugene. We'll see what happens when the final list kind of gets finalized and guys start rolling in on Saturday, and we see who's here and who's not. They have 10 commitments. It's the number one class in the country. But you look at it, and your top 4 players are all going to be in Eugene. I would imagine Tony Cumberland from Willamette High School here in Eugene will pop over at some point as well. That would mean 5 out of your top 6 commits are around campus, and that's always a good thing because, as we know, peer recruiting is just as important as coach recruiting.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that's such a big part of this at this point is these classes come together in part because of the staffs, but also because the guys who want to play together. And for Oregon, to your point, already the number one class in the country, a chance to do something really special here. That sort of a start is pretty significant in terms of putting this whole thing together. And I look at the way this class is and just the names that you read off there. Those are all players that, and again, if you're a casual to recruiting or you aren't quite paying attention till now, this is maybe a good time to kind of start dialing in on the 26 class because 2025 is basically in the rear view. I know that we still have signing day in a couple of weeks here for the spring, the second signing period, I guess I should say, and Oregon may or may not add some more players there, but the real additions are going to be in 2026, and that's going to be where the recruiting stories really are from now. And so, go watch Kendra Harrison and Tredarian Ball's tape. Those guys are so explosive and fun to watch, and go check out some of these defensive and offensive linemen that they've already got committed. There's a ton of talent already kind of developing in this class, and I think that's the really fun part. And then we can talk about it, Matt. Like, this is also a weekend where maybe they come away with some commitments. Maybe they add to this number one ranked class. And I don't know what the full count is in terms of uncommitted prospects here, but with just the number and the way Oregon's recruiting, I guess I would probably be almost surprised if we don't see, at least by the middle of next week or sometime early February, probably something maybe even as immediate as during the weekend, somebody commits.
22 players will be on campus that we've confirmed that are not currently committed to Oregon. There is one guy committed to another school. We'll touch on him later. But 22 guys. I think there's a couple that could pop shortly after this weekend. And then I don't know how we want to define shortly. I agree with you. I would be surprised if one of these guys that I'm going to talk about doesn't commit here in the next couple of weeks. But this is all about setting yourself up maybe for a commitment in spring when they come out for an unofficial visit to watch spring practice in March or April, and then they come to be a peer recruiter as an official visitor in the month of June.
Right. Right.
But I think there are some names. The big one is Nehemiah Talona, a 3-star defensive lineman from De La Salle High School in the Bay Area. Another player that Oregon signed one last year in 2025, Matthew Johnson. This is his teammate, very similar profile, a guy that kind of flew under the radar and, just kind of gradually got a higher ranking every single update. It would not surprise me if this is going to be another one of those cases. Brandon Huffman was the first person to throw a crystal ball in. He did it this week. Usually, I'm not going to speak for Brandon, but our history shows that usually when one of our big dogs within the network, Brandon Huffman, Greg Biggins, Tom Loy, Blair Anguillo, when one of those guys kind of places a crystal ball, like it's a pretty clear indicator something's going to be coming in the immediate future. So it would not surprise me in the slightest if Nehemiah Talanoa joins Oregon's commit list. And, that would be yet again another front 7 type player for this class. They've already got, from just a quick standpoint, 6 guys currently committed that are defensive linemen or edge or linebacker prospects. This would make it the 7th if it happens. A clear shift from 2025, where I think they only signed a small handful, 2 or 3 guys at that group because they didn't need to, and because of their 2024 recruiting. So this looks like where they're going to load up again. And I think what's really important is you look out west, and we talk about every single year how there are so few number of players that are Oregon quality level, that are championship quality level players out west along the defensive line. And this year it's a loaded group. And from the most part, Oregon has all the top guys already committed, which is a really good sign.
And that's been the trend, right? I mean, you mentioned 2025 was a class where they didn't really put I don't want to say they didn't put a whole lot of effort, but they just didn't take a lot of defensive line / linebackers. I mean, I think they took
They didn't
4.
need to.
They took 4. They took Johnson, they took Wyatt, and Toby Hostrup on the outside, and then they took Gavin Nix. I believe that's the list. But then you go back and you think about the 2024 signing class, and they just got everybody up front on the West Coast with Elijah Rushing and Aiden Breland and Jericho Johnson, who I think were like the 3 top, to your point, front 7 guys in the, out west in that class. And then also taking all these linebackers. I think they took like 2 or 3 of the best linebackers on the West Coast with Kamar Mathudi and Braden Platt and Dylan Williams. So, they took a bit of a gap year almost at 24, which probably or 25, which probably lined up with the fact that the West Coast maybe didn't have quite as much elite defensive line linebacker talent. This is a year, to Matt's point, where that's kind of shifting back, and kind of the way the calendar's worked out here, you kind of almost applaud sort of the foresight and strategy that Oregon staff had of kind of being like, okay, we did a ton of heavy lifting in 24, 25, maybe there's not quite as much out here. We're going to take a step back because we know in 2026, that's going to be when we can really hit. And I think we've already seen some of that develop. And to your point, Matt, and you look at some of the other names that we can get through here, they might continue to kind of add to that commitment list, to that kind of caliber of stuff here over the next couple of weeks, couple of months, as recruiting really picks up.
Another guy I would be curious to see what happens the next couple of weeks to a couple of months is Jax Tanner, an interior offensive lineman from Meridian, Idaho. He's the number 2 player in the state of Idaho. He's only a 3-star, and I'd say that, like, not sarcastically, he's talented. But Oregon's recruiting now at a level where they may only sign 2 or 3 or 4 3-star prospects. Everybody else will be 4 or 5-star caliber guys. He's talented in his own right. And this might be a case where he's been here a couple times. He's really high on Oregon. I know Alik Terry loves his versatility in the interior, could play center, could play guard. I think he plays tackle at the high school level, but probably doesn't project on the outside at the next level. But this might be one where it comes to a case where if Oregon's willing to take him, it might be a case if you want to be part of this program, you might need to commit sooner than later if you want to be part of the program, because we're going to fill up, and that might be kind of the message. So just that would be another guy where I'm just kind of like, things are aligned where if he wants to be here and Oregon signs off on it, it might be another name to watch pop, relatively after this weekend.
Idaho becoming a hotbed. I mean, legitimately though, like you think about what's happened the last 4 or 5 years from that state, it's very strange. And I can't think of off the top of my head, like pre-Kenyon Sadiq Gatlin-Bear, like the last time Oregon went heavy after an Idaho kid. I think there was a defensive back maybe in like the 2013-15 range. I think maybe is there something like Khalil something that came from Idaho?
Yes. Khalil Oliver.
There you go. That was like so I'm in my head, I'm thinking it's been a while since that's been a state where Oregon's hit. And again, I'm not suggesting it's like truly a hotbed, but like there've been some really good young players that have come from that area. And so maybe this is the latest in the line for Oregon.
They've offered multiple kids from the state of Idaho already in 2026. I'm gonna pull it up. Jax Tanner, I think, was the first one that they offered, and then ironically enough, another offensive lineman, Kelvin Obot from Fruitland, Idaho. I think that's another suburb of.
He's a pretty big deal in this cycle.
Yes, he is the number 1 player in the state. He is a top 150 overall prospect at offensive tackle and the number 11 player in the country at the offensive tackle position. I checked him, see if he was coming. As of a couple of days ago, he was not. we'll see what happens there. But Oregon has sent Alik Terry. They've sent the law firm out there a couple times this month to check in on him. Really talented dude. I mean, you just look at his offer list and you look at the schools that have thrown offers already: Michigan, Oregon, Tennessee, Utah, USC, Washington, Wisconsin, BYU, Boise State. I mean, he's got multiple playoff teams who have offered him in Oregon, Tennessee, and Boise State. It would not surprise, Washington and Michigan played for the national championship 2 years ago. This tells you this is a dude. So yeah, Idaho's kind of in a spot where I think Oregon was probably 5 or 6 years ago, where the 2 or 3 best players were legit, and then everybody else was still probably not Pac-12 level or now Power 5 level. The state of Oregon has kind of grown to now where you can kind of expect 5 or 6 guys every year to be Power 5 level. So yeah, it's interesting. We'll certainly see how much they recruit that area and who anyone else kind of pops up. But yeah, Jax Tanner would be another guy that I think could be worth monitoring what happens there. Another one maybe that's high up on the board that I just don't think will commit right away, but has been always high on the Ducks and could be the ball that gets the snowball moving towards a spring or summer commitment is Talanoa Ely, a linebacker from Orange Lutheran High School in California. Look, we've talked about it a couple times. Like they need to continue to upgrade the linebacker position. Yeah. He's I think the top guy out west. He's the number 3 player at the position nationally. He's a top 30 player. Like this is going to be a borderline 5-star, and he's got the size, 6'3", 215 already. Biggins calls him on our scouting report arguably the best all-around linebacker in the state, regardless of class. And that was done in March of 2024. Wow. So that's how talented this kid is. He's been here before a couple times. Just this is one where the ball is moving, and maybe it gets big enough now where a commitment could come in 2 or 3 months, if he gets here up to Eugene again for spring ball.
Yeah, super dynamic and fun to watch on tape, by the way. I agree that Oregon does need to upgrade at linebacker and that there's a need there. I would be really curious to see what this year presents in terms of what we think of the younger players, but it might be a situation where if he does pick Oregon ultimately and he signs, that there's like seemingly some potential for immediate playing time. And I say that because you look at what Oregon will be losing. Betcher, obviously, Devin Jackson, I guess, would have theoretically an NFL decision to make, but like there's not a whole lot of proven talent there. And so a player of this caliber, again, potential 5-star kid, again, we're now projecting A, he commits to Oregon, and B, what the depth chart looks like a year from now. But you could see an opportunity where this could be somebody who's pretty impactful early on if he does end up picking the Ducks.
All right. Let's dive into maybe the big meat of this visit. We were talking about this pre-visit, and we knew the names, but when you start like stacking them on top of one another, you're like, holy smokes, to the point where I feel like we throw this out there every cycle now because Oregon recruiting continues to elevate itself and the standard continues to get raised. But I think from probably like a top 10 highest rated group of your group of guys on campus, or maybe your top 15, this could stack up against any group previously that's been in Eugene. We've counted 10 guys are either the 24/7 Sports number 1 rated player at their position or the 24/7 Sports composite number 1 player at their position across the 2027 and 2026 recruiting classes. Most of these guys are 2026 players. So we're talking legitimate 5-star players. 24/7 Sports hasn't released our full rankings yet for this class. That will probably come in the next month or so. So we don't have any current 5-stars in our database. We have guys ranked, the number 1 player in the country, but we just haven't issued out the 5-stars yet. The big one is Chris Henry. He's the number 3 player in the composite nationally. regardless of position. He's the number one receiver in the country. He's the number one player in California, obviously. He's a top 13 player for us as a network by ourselves. He's currently committed to Ohio State. It's going to be hard to pluck him away, especially with the success Jeremiah Smith had and Emeka Egbuka had and Cornell Tate has. But if there's a school out there, it's kind of widely thought of. Like if he's going to flip somewhere, it's going to be Oregon. He's been here a couple times now, and this is a dynamic player. He's 6'5". He's like everything you want from a physical standpoint, from an NFL perspective. Greg Biggins compares him to Mike Evans. That's an unbelievably awesome comparison. This is a big one where if Oregon can really lock in here and flip him, this could be another one of those DeCorian Moore program changing kind of commitments if it happens.
Well, and he's one of those immediate impact guys.
Yes.
Right. I mean, like, and because not all 5 stars are created equal that way. And we talked about this a couple times of like, I remember when Jurion Dickey committed with Biggins on it, he was like, this is a guy who might take a little bit of time for him to find his footing. And obviously that's been still the case. We're still waiting for that. DeCorian Moore is a guy that people will tell you he should be able to go right away. And Chris Henry, undoubtedly, he was up at both he and Moore were up at SNL this past summer. And my gosh, just watching those guys move around and for Henry, I mean, he's all of 6'5". Like the physical stuff, just walking, just as he's entering the playing surface, you're like, that's going to be a guy. And the fact that he's like 16 at the time, you're kind of like, that's really absurd. And then you watch him move and just some of the things he's able to do in the air in terms of the ball skills and everything. Yeah, this is probably going to be an Ohio State guy and probably another one of those guys that's going to be really annoying to face every year. I think that would be the direction it seems like it's going. But man, if you could find a way to flip him, you would really be kind of killing a couple birds with one stone there in terms of stopping him from going to what's becoming, I think, one of your biggest rivals. And then obviously adding a player of that caliber who, again, I think if you go back to back with Moore and Henry, you'd be building some kind of receiving core.
Absolutely. I mean, it turns into one of the best in the country, if not the best, probably.
And then you throw in like Gatlin Bear, who'd be coming off his mission.
Who was a 5-star.
Right.
Next on the list, the number 1 linebacker in the composite, the number 2 linebacker for us, a top 20 player for us. He's a top 10 player nationally in the composite. Tyler Atkinson, 6'2" linebacker from Loganville, Georgia, Powerhouse High School, Grayson. Look, this is going to be tough to get. He's in the thick country of Georgia under Kirby Smart's thumb. Clemson's involved there. Auburn's involved. Alabama, Tennessee, like you name it. Three playoff teams are already in good position for him, plus Alabama. But Oregon's trying. They've got a good step into the right direction. They've developed some connections here, and now it's your opportunity to kind of swing for the fences and make this visit so impressive that he wants to come back in the spring, and then you do it again, and then you use an official visit, and that's where the ball goes rolling. But nonetheless, this is an opportunity. We talked about it. Bryce Betcher will be gone next season. Devin Jackson will be a senior going into the 2026 season. So, and we don't really know who's behind that.
Exactly.
Obviously, a ton of that will change between the 25 start of the season and when Atkinson enrolls. But right now, at least, they can say, look, we know for sure one guy will be back in 2026. You would assume he's probably going to be a starter caliber guy, but everything else after that's an unknown right now. And this is a guy that will be another one of those, probably a day one type of player that can find a role, whether it's on the bench, special teams, or maybe he pushes his way into starting lineup. That probably feels a little unlikely, but nonetheless, this is a dude that's highly productive, an inside guy, unbelievable athleticism that you have to go after.
Yeah, and just briefly, I think there's been a threshold that's been crossed for Oregon in terms of going after some of these elite SEC regional players. I'm not saying they're going to get him necessarily at all. I'm not even speaking specifically to his recruitment, but Oregon this last cycle, I think it always felt like Oregon could go into the Southeast and basically Southwest, Texas over, and they could get high quality players. And they certainly, like, they've built this program off of Texas and Florida and Georgia and different parts of the country, but they've more recently been able to actually go get like the guys that the big SEC programs covet. You just look at like both Offord and DeCorian Moore this cycle, like Alabama and Texas's top recruits. Like that's an area that didn't feel attainable. That, again, not specifically for Atkinson, but I just wouldn't be surprised at all if we look up and go, wow, they did it. They went out and got another 5-star kid from another region of the country. Like, it doesn't have to be as regional as it used to be. I think that really speaks to what Oregon's become as a brand there, because that is a difference, because that was not always the case. Because again, I just remember like the progression was obviously Texas was really good under Chip and Mark, but then Willie Taggart shows up and he goes, we're going to hit Florida really, really hard because that's where I'm from. Well, they signed like 14 kids from Florida, Matt, but like kind of not very many of them are particularly good.
Yeah.
And then Mario comes in. It's kind of the same thing, but a little bit better. They're taking steps. And now finally under Dan, it's like we can go into these states
and sign legit dudes
and sign the top guys. So that's something that's just kind of on my radar that has changed. That is maybe doesn't feel like the biggest thing to casual listeners, but that has been kind of a change over the last just 2 or 3 cycles, I'd say.
One of the fastest players in the country will be here as well. Brandon Arrington, the number 1 athlete, a top 15 player in 24/7 Sports composite rankings. He's our number 2 athlete by just 24/7 Sports and our top 25 player. So again, this is a guy that's more than likely going to be a 5-star when our 5-star rankings come out. Everyone in the country is going after him. 6'2", defensive back type player. Huffman says he's a standout star, or Greg Biggins says he's a two-sport standout. Has a personal best 100 meters of 10.43, also 20.76 for the 200 meter, and did this as a sophomore. Is also a guy that will more than likely end up running track at the next level on top of whatever he does from a football perspective. Has the ability to be a long cover corner as well, but upside is probably highest as a receiver. And his ceiling is as high as any skill player in the region, is what Greg Biggins wrote back in 2014 of March. So this is a guy that he's got both sides of the ball. I would be curious to see if he plays receiver at Oregon. I kind of feel more like defensive back might fit better, but who do I know? Either way, you add the speed, whether it's a guy over the top offensively or cover corner, you're adding a dynamic player.
Yeah, all of that reminds me of kind of what the elevator pitch was for Brandon Finney last cycle. Yeah. Like, great. I don't know if Finney ran 10.4, but like track speed, 6'2", really long and rangy. Finney also was a pretty good receiver. I don't know if anybody's gone and watched like the huddle highlights. He played receiver at a high level as well. So this is another player that would be obviously really exciting and really just kind of fits the trend of what Oregon's recruiting at corner. If that ends up being where he's at, and if it's receiver, like this is just more speed, and like obviously like with DeCorian Moore and Gatlin Bear, they would have quite the talent in terms of just being able to take the top off of the defense, and that's not something they've necessarily lacked here the last couple of years. Maybe just more the ability to connect on some of those shots downfield.
Another player from SEC country, Anthony Jones, a 6'4" edge player, the number 1 edge player in the country, a top 10 player by the 24/7 Sports composite. He's been to Eugene. I think he was here for Saturday Night Live, if I remember correctly. Really, really talented player. Greg Biggins' eval back in May of last year says we'll be on the short list when talking about best edge rushers in the 2026 class. Elite get off, can dip and bend, and has great closing speed. Has athleticism to chase down, plays from behind, and shows a crazy motor. And look, if we're gonna really nitpick, in my opinion, of Oregon's defense, like they need more these types of guys, where the Abdul Carters, the Jack Sawyers, guys that just were tenacious off the edge. They had some, but they just need more of them that truly strike fear into the eye. And this is another one of those type guys.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I think you're excited about the future with Mateo and Tatum.
Absolutely.
I think there's a chance to have, I mean, like this just the reading what you read, that sounds like a kind of a different type of player, though, from what Oregon currently has. That sounds more like a the Kayvon Thibodeau type of like wins with athleticism and burst, maybe before the other stuff. Whereas Mateo's more of a power to speed guy, and Tatum is, I guess, he's pretty explosive, but he's not like an elite explosive guy. So yeah, I could see this being, if that is the calling card, that would be maybe a nice fit with what they've already got. And again, we're also talking about players that are a couple of years down the line from joining the team, and most likely Mateo's not going to be on the roster for 2026, my guess.
Yeah, it would be a pretty big surprise if he was. Next on line, we've already talked about him. Kendra Harrison, though, the number 1 tight end in the country and the top 10 player. He's ranked number 9 overall by the composite rankings. 6'7", 243 pounds. Like, he's only a junior in high school right now, and physically he's got the size already to play the position. It's just now, can you match the physicality? Can you match the mental aspect of the game? But this is a talented dude. Can certainly play basketball wherever he wants. And I think you look at it, and Andrew Evans, our director of scouting, this was done back in June of 2023. So, we probably need to get, they probably know this already, but an updated eval of him. But back in June of 2023, so he was a freshman, could be molded into a variety of different things, but ceiling might ultimately be highest as an inline tight end, given large catch radius and potential as a blocker. Rare size makes him a straight-up mismatch for high school defenders, especially in the red zone. This is exactly what they need. They've got Kenyon Sadiq already. Vanderplug is very similar to that. Brock Harris, another guy in this class they're looking at, kind of fits that mold. This is like the inline guy that they need to add to this position.
And he reminds me a lot of, Darnell Washington. And
Yep.
I guess this is where you're not going to be able to replicate that full Georgia tight end situation, because Washington and, obviously Brock Bowers played together, but Kendra Harrison and Kenyon Sadiq won't play together. But those are kind of like strangely similar players that, from an individual comparison perspective, with Sadiq being similar to Bowers and Harrison being similar to Washington. But just like go watch it. Like, and I think that was a bummer for me with Darnell Washington was what he was athletically at an early age, and then kind of what departed because of adding on some weight and I think some injury. But Harrison makes guys look so silly on the open field with the football, which is so unusual for a person. Like, first off, it just looks weird that a person that tall has the ball. He's listed at 6'7". He looks almost bigger than that, but his just movement skills in the open field for that size is very, very unusual. Certainly one of the more fun kind of huddle highlights to watch in the last couple of classes for Oregon.
Now let's move to 2027, because the list keeps going here. The number 2 player in the country by 24/7 Sports, and also the number 1 player at the edge position, Richard Wesley from Sierra Canyon High School. Brandon Huffman confirmed this for us, that he will be here in town. This kid's a sophomore, Eric, and he's already 6'5", 250 pounds. He's already got 17 scholarship offers, which include Oregon, Georgia, Arizona State, which was a playoff team. Tennessee was a playoff team. SMU was a playoff team. This is a dude that it's already, as a sophomore, has a who's list and has the size that you love. And get this, Greg Biggins eval back in the fall of his sophomore season. Best edge rush prospect to come out of California since Kayvon Thibodeau in 2019.
Well, that guy was pretty good. So if you can get this guy, and that just kind of reading through him and look, that looks kind of like that Abdul Carter type. Maybe he's going to play a little bigger than that because he's already at 250, but that sort of feels like more of like the projection with him. And that it's early, but boy, it's crazy to be talking about 2027 guys, but that's the way the recruiting works, and that's where we are on the calendar. But this would be, again, we're not saying this is anything that's imminent by any means at all, and this guy's going to have every school in the country. But this is a guy that if you could theoretically get locked down earlier than later, that would be just a huge building piece for the class. And again, Oregon's done a great job with top West Coast guys. So let's see.
Biggins also says at the same stage as Thibodeau, Wesley is bigger, just as athletic, and plays more consistent motor than Thibodeau. So if that's the case, holy smokes, that dude's going to be unbelievably good.
Yeah.
Another player from Sierra Canyon who's also a top 15 player in the composite, the number one corner in the composite, Avon Finney, 6'2". Again, another guy that's got all the big schools already after him. Is one of the early invites to the 2027 All-American Bowl. That should tell you like how good this guy is, how his measurables project. Like he's already earning an invite to that prestigious game. So another name to know that will be on campus. And look, we've talked about it before. Oregon seems to be going after taller corners, and this is another one of those guys.
And a really, really good one. Yeah, definitely somebody whose tape you should go check out. I mean, just the type of athlete that is presenting itself at corner now, and these are the top of the top, but just the way these guys move at such a young age with the length and the size, it's just a totally different position than what it had been for so long.
Then the last guy for the 2027 class that we'll touch on, Duvet Williams, the number one corner by 24/7 Sports, a top 20 player nationally for us. He's ranked 18th in the country. Plays his prep football at Sierra High School in Gardena, California. That's historically a school that has produced some of the Pac-12's most electric players over the last decade or so. A lot of those guys have gone to USC. That is no longer the case. USC does not have the stranglehold on this school that they once did. Greg Biggins provided a scouting report and says that he compares very similar to players who played at Sierra previously in Robert Woods and Adoree Jackson, both guys that went to USC, both guys that were dynamic players at the receiver/athlete position. Adoree played both ways a little bit. He was more low a corner and return specialist guy, but he's also a track athlete. He's 6'2". He's got a 10.9 200-meter dash as a freshman last year. So he's got the good speed here, and it's probably another guy that, quite frankly, the track and field team's probably saying, please bring this guy because we'd love to have him as basically what you would call like a free player because Oregon football is footing the scholarship.
Yeah, it's interesting seeing, and I remember when we had Biggins on, maybe it was a year ago, just him talking about, I think it was specifically with like Talanoa Ely and some of these other guys, and maybe with Bot Matafalu, the commitment of like, these were guys that historically would be USC commitments. Like their families grew up USC fans, et cetera. But with the way things have kind of gone with the two programs, Oregon is now in a position potentially to land both of them. And I'll just be kind of curious to see if that feels like a trend that we see carry on, through 27 and beyond, because it does feel like on the field things are going in one direction. And then as weird as it feels, Matt, it feels like Oregon is lapping USC and UCLA for the kids in their part of the state that they had. I mean, I think we almost forget like UCLA was a consistent top 15, top 12 recruiting destination for 6 to 8 years, like for a long time there, kind of in like the late 2000, into the mid 2010s, and they've completely fallen off. And USC was like in position to sign the number one class in the country with regularity, and they're no longer there. And it's been Oregon that's kind of emerged in Southern California. And reading through all the names you did there, Matt, you get a sense of how many of these guys are from that area, and kind of we'll see if Oregon can circle the wagons with those guys.
Yeah, Oregon has, to your point, they've lapped USC and UCLA in recruiting. They're the hot school. They're the one that all the big prospects want to. Some of that's a large part of that is because of Oregon's success on the field and their alignment athletically in the athletics department, of having the resources around the program and the intent to recruit it. And that's the main driver factor. But secondary, they've been probably blessed with ineptitude at USC and UCLA to allow this to happen. And now can you bear as much fruit as you possibly can until things get righted at USC and it becomes harder. And I think with Oregon, they've become a consistent power. They've become a consistent winner. Their brand is as bright and as big as it's been ever. They've got a coach that's committed to being at Oregon, that now they've sunk their teeth in deep enough in SoCal that it doesn't really matter anymore what USC does. They're going to be a player regardless of USC gets themselves back to where they were somehow under Pete Carroll, where they're consistently playing for the national championship, I don't think it matters. Like Oregon, it'll be harder. I'm not going to say Oregon's going to be the number one dog, but like USC will not. My thinking is they will not clean up like they previously did. It's now a different world.
Yeah, when you said, when they get their ship righted, I'm kind of going like, is that more of an if to me? Because
Yes.
it's felt like for 15 years now, it was, they're taking a step in that direction, and it's just not worked out. I mean, we'll see if Lincoln Riley's able to get this going, but like, I'm just, not to turn this into a USC podcast, but I've just been really surprised by the lack of ability to really turn the corner there. And in fact, kind of feel like they're regressing. And I don't expect USC to be significantly better in 2025. I just did my ranking the toughest games on Oregon's schedule. And you would think a game with USC, that kind of a program, would be right near the top. But I think I had it 6th out of 12 games, and that just sort of speaks to sort of the remarkability, I guess, of where that program is at. I mean, they've gone from being, growing up out here, the premier program, to now being like on the West Coast. What are they, like the 4th or 5th best program each year?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just such a weird situation. And frankly, I'm not sure I see it changing. It doesn't certainly feel like that's going to be the case in 2025. I mean, they lost so many of their best players. So, and we'll see what happens on the recruiting front too. I can't imagine that's going to change with this administration unless they really figure it out on the field, which remains to be seen. So
you can follow all our coverage from the fallout of Oregon Junior Day on duckterritory.com. Again, remember, these prospects will be arriving and leaving throughout Saturday. It's going to be an all-day type thing for just multiple players. There's not one set schedule. So we'll have updates coming in as we get them through the weekend and into next week. Hopefully we'll get some interviews up shortly after Junior Day visits conclude, and then throughout all of next week as well on duckterritory.com. So highly encourage you guys, if you want more information about how the weekend went, where things are progressing for Oregon recruiting. Remember, number one class in the country for 2026 already with 10 verbal commitments. Their average per recruit ranking is higher than it was last year, and they finished, I think, 4th in the country. So they're already off to a better start than they were last year. So we'll see if Oregon can sign for the 3rd straight year its best class in school history. And that starts on Saturday with Junior Day. But until then, our next show, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.